Hey, welcome to the Beyond the Sequence podcast. This is Sarah Amidon, and I'm here with my amazing colleague, Amanda Archibald. And this is our inaugural podcast episode. So, we're doing a little bit of an intro into us and what we see in our practice and just get to know us a little
Absolutely.
bit.
Sarah, why don't we talk about how we know each other?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, some of the intro stuff that we'll go into today, I think, is really what ushered me to pursuing Amanda. She was so gracious to take me on as a student and to mentor me in genomics because the reality is we can only read so many gene reports in a day and in a week. And so we want to multiply the genomic space. So it was me pursuing my dietetics degree to go back to school to be a registered dietitian, which I graduated in 2022. And Amanda was just such an integral part of my whole journey because I looked around, I said, who's practicing this? This approach has changed my health life. And Amanda was one of the only clinicians that I saw that was doing it. And I said, I want to be like her when I grow up. So she was so great to say yes with enough poking and prodding and bugging of the student.
Yeah,
So
so we
thank
always
you,
say it's a
Amanda.
mentor-mentee relationship that came together. And now I think Sarah can actually mentor me, in the space. So yeah, that's how we know each other. And now Sarah and I probably talk every day. We will talk about, the variety of things we touch through DNA on a daily basis. But there's probably not a day goes by where we haven't flipped a message, just asking a question in science, or hey, I'm seeing this, or what do you know about that, or something above and beyond the genome. So beyond the sequence, what are we hoping, Sarah? No, not hoping. What are we aspiring to educate our audience about with this podcast? What's our inspiration?
I think I'm most excited to bring people into our world, almost like they're a fly on the wall. Like, what is it that you talk about? Because so often, you and I will see something in a certain way because our brains light up in biochemistry pathways, almost like visually. I don't know if that
Mm-hmm.
happens to you too. But someone describes a symptom or a health condition and I'm just computing it in my brain to go, okay, let's work backwards. How can we unravel this? So looking beyond the sequence of our DNA, because this is an epigenetics focus. So we've got genetics, which is, you think of genetic counseling where you'll talk about oncology or inborn errors of metabolism, which also could be helped epigenetically too, not saying that they can't. Or you've got your prenatal conditions as well. So I think looking not just at the genetic space, but at the epigenetics and the gene expression space and how we can manipulate our gene expression to be beneficial. Is there anything you want to add to
No,
that, Amanda?
what we really want to unpack, because exactly what you said, we read patterns for a living. We read the code of how humans are built. And because of that, we're sort of on a daily basis unpacking this book of every single individual whose DNA we're not unraveling, but we're decoding. And it gives us tremendous insights into where some of the issues may be, how we kind of construct a health journey or a health restoration journey for individuals based on symptoms, based on their DNA, and based on the patterns that we see. And then we said, well, gosh, this work is so interesting. Why don't we go beyond the sequence and create a podcast where you can see what we're seeing in these sequences. And so that's really the inspiration. And so as we go through different episodes, you're going to see us have these very informal conversations. What do you see? What do you know? What kind of really jazz you today or this week? But do it in a way that you know that we're obviously working deeply in the like cellars, if you will, of evidence-based science. But we want to show you in a way, in a manner that you can understand or grasp onto how powerful understanding your DNA really is. So on that note, Sarah, um,
Well, I also want to ask you, Amanda, how did you've been a dietitian for many, many years, and how did you find
See,
genomics?
she
How
wouldn't
did
let
you get
me
into
out,
this
right? I
space?
had to answer the question. Actually, the way I got into genomics, like you, I was and still am a science geek. Biochemistry is the one course, along with organic chemistry at university, that everyone like shirks from. Like it is the horror course. I loved it, but what happened when I graduated, and I think you picked up on this when you were doing your master's degree, when I graduated, I realized I wasn't using biochemistry. And I said this, and so it kind of got left back there, but I never lost my interest. Well, fast forward to answer your question, I was presenting in South Africa, probably like 2012, 2013. I was there like 3 times at least. And the last time I was at, no, second to the last time I was there, I was at a conference in Johannesburg and I was teaching a very sort of culinary forward nutrition science, essentially, using flavor and tasting workshop. Anyone listening from South Africa will remember those days. But in the audience was our great friend, Yale Jaffe, who we're going to be presenting with in New York next week. And at that time, Yale was doing her PhD in nutrigenomics. And she started chatting with me, and she said, the way you think and the way you're presenting, because I also worked as an analyst at the time, so it's a certain way of thinking. She said, you should really look at the field of nutrigenomics and nutrigenetics. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so, long story short, she introduced me to the field, and that's where she and I started working together with our great colleague in Australia, Christine Houghton. And together, the three of us, but it was Yale's inspiration, we stood up a conference called Translational Nutrigenomics. So that was in Joburg. We were years ahead of our time, I think. And I never looked back because I said, why on earth aren't we using the logic of DNA to plug nutrition science into? When you know, right, you can use predominantly, but not only nutrients, right, to influence your genome, but you can also use stress management, right? Your emotional health, it directly impacts your genome, how you exercise, whether you sleep, and what you're exposed to and what you're not exposed to, and on and on and on. All of this influences your DNA, which is how you're built. So I never look back. So it's really thanks to being in South Africa and introduction to Yale and Christine that just said, there is no other course for me. There's the only way I am going to work in the future. So I actually stepped back into clinical science. I stepped back into clinical practice after many years being in other spaces. Yeah, that's my journey. Right. Isn't it?
That's so cool. So cool. I mean, it's crazy to think that, we're blazing trails. I mean, the science is there, but who's implementing it? Who's translating and interpreting nutrition science into clinical practice? And that's what you and I are doing. And we want to continue to bring more and more people into it because, again, we're only, one and two people.
Exactly. And we have many colleagues right alongside us, coming up with us, definitely those in research and ahead of us, blazing trail in this field. But yeah, it's an exciting place to be. So let me ask you this then. If someone were to describe to you how genomics makes a difference in your work, what would it be? Why are you using genomics? Why did you choose to use it? So it's almost like, what's your elevator pitch? Why are you using it?
Yeah, such a great question. And I get asked this often. Like, it's such a nuanced thing that no one's ever heard of. So you have to start really, really basic and not pile on tons of science with them. But honestly, my whole life was changed by a simple cheek swab when I had a number of autoimmune conditions and multiple chronic infections, Epstein-Barr, Lyme disease, and then Hashimoto's on top of it, pernicious anemia. And there really wasn't a great treatment for me. I was 30 pounds underweight and, had cramping for 4 hours every time I ate. And there's just so very little help. You go to the emergency room, as I did a couple of times, and the ER docs are scratching their heads and they're saying, I'm so sorry. Like, your labs here are
Plastic.
normal, and I'm so sorry I can't help
Everything's
you.
normal. That is
Yeah.
like the dreaded response that so many of our clients get. Go ahead.
Yeah. thankfully, they at least had empathy and recognized, like, I'm not making this up. Why would I come in here with a toddler and a baby and be, sharing some wild tale? But, seeing a gastroenterologist, doing my due diligence, like everyone asked me to, I'm like, what could they possibly do for me? I walk in there, he's like, you've got IBS, here's a medication, you're going to take it for the rest of your life. And I asked him point blank, so you're telling me there's nothing I can do with my nutrition and my diet to improve my situation? And he said no. And I'm an athlete. I've, played sports my whole life. That cannot possibly be true. And so I walked out the door, I threw it in the trash and thought there's got to be another way. So thankfully, I have a nutrition, functional medicine practitioner here in Indianapolis at Fully Armored. I'll just do a shout out to Alta Skelton, a nurse practitioner in Carmel, and she was like, "Okay, we're really digging. We're running lots of testing. Let's run your genes." So my very first report, that came back, and it was like, "Oh, you're having issues with methylation." And I was like, "What's that? I don't know what
We
that is."
will.
We'll save that
Hang
for
in
another
there,
episode.
methylation. We're definitely
Uh,
going to decode
oh, yes.
methylation.
Yes. But yeah, B vitamin metabolism was just not happening optimally for me. And she was at least knowledgeable enough to go, hey, let's do this methylated B complex. And within 2 days, I could eat without cramping. And that was just like, what are we doing? You can like learn this from a cheek swab from DNA to like inform, the decisions and the interventions that you're making. And so that's why I did it. And I said, okay, who's practicing this? Who's doing this? What can I do to, be an expert in this space? And that's when I found you. So I guess I shared my story a little backwards, but yeah, I mean, that's a little more than an elevator pitch, but long story short, it changed my life and I went to school to
And you
practice it.
did.
So,
And you were actually, along with another of our colleagues, Amy McRae, we'll give you a call out, Amy. We're both doing their master's degree at the same time, taking a foundation course that I still offer in DNA education and training. So they were piggybacking a master's degree and internship, which is not easy. It's not fun. I'm trying to learn so that when they graduated, they could immediately hit the road and practice genomics, and they do. And they're probably two of the most informed clinicians I have the opportunity to work with, because you're practicing using the lens of genomics. So I'm going to answer the question that I asked you, which is, what's your elevator pitch, or how would you describe, better still, how do you describe how genomics makes a difference in your work? First of all, I think you and I will both agree that we could not practice without it. And the reason is because DNA helps us look for inefficiencies in how you're built. So this is in your genes. It looks at inefficiency in your structure, your construction plan, right? Your framework. And when you're looking for inefficiencies, they're often in the dustiest, dark, I don't want to say dirty places. So for who would connect Sarah's experience with cramping to methylation, right? You're not going to do that. You'll be given a medication. What we have the ability to do is unravel or unpack your blueprints. We work with a number of different testing companies. We'll talk about that on another podcast, who we work with, why, what we see, what we might choose with different companies, for example. But when you work from a blank sheet of paper, if you will, so somebody will come in and see us. This is a long elevator pitch, right? Because there's no soundbite for genomics, right? Other than help sharpen your sword, sharpen
no.
your lens, look in the dark places, the inefficiencies, the dusty places, because when you can bring your biochemistry back online, all the teeth of all the cycles in your body will start to kind of grip together again, like gears. Do we still have gears, Sarah? I don't know. you know, yeah,
Everything's so
digital
digital.
gears.
The analog
But
is
once they
gone
start
away.
to turn, like if you pour in B12, like vitamin B12, that inspires, or jolts a lot of other pathways to get back online. So genomics is a precision tool. Here's the soundbite, the elevator pitch. It's a precision tool to help us get to root cause and to answer the question, what's wrong, right? for us clinically, for practitioners who are listening in, it allows us to rapidly prioritize a care plan. Doesn't mean to say we can get you to well as fast, but the care plan that we generate is completely different because we're knowing where the inefficiencies are and how you're built. And we can bring those back online by validating what we're seeing in labs. There's no guesswork here, and getting you back to well. And I think what we have to also say, Sarah, is that the tool that we're using, DNA, is one of the tools in the clinical toolbox. It's not the only tool, but it happens to sharpen a lens for us in a way that's more precise and faster than if you're tapping around running a bunch of labs, which gets to be expensive and time consuming, and you're told the dreaded words, there's nothing wrong. So there's no elevator pitch. So
Yes, it's so hard to apply genomics for a lot of areas of practice because if you're in the emergency room, they can only help
exactly.
with so many things, right? They don't even run B12 labs unless you are
Mm-hmm.
inpatient. So I would have first needed to be admitted, but if they can't find anything initially wrong with you, they're not going to admit you. I mean, if they had actually had a dietitian in the emergency room who was asking questions about, my weight loss, I probably would have been earmarked
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
malnutrition risk. So that is a complete missed opportunity. Now we can't be good at everything, so I'll validate that. But if you're in the emergency room, also being able to know who to refer people to
Mm-hmm.
outpatient. So there's just a little bit of loss and grief there because I know my story is not unique. And I know that the patients that do come see me have seen, a few or a dozen, different practitioners, even at the Mayo
Mm-hmm.
Clinic, the Cleveland Clinic. They just haven't received the kind of care that they're looking for because at some point we get to the end of our knowledge and we say, I'm so sorry, I can't
Exactly.
help you.
And I think it's a dream, maybe it's a mission, right? That every human should have the opportunity to have their DNA put at the front of the medical record, the work that we do, because that becomes a reference point. It's like, oh, this is how this person's built. Again, it's one major tool. It's not the only tool, but imagine having that because things like tolerances, that DNA helps explain a lot of symptoms and conditions. Anyway, you will go round and round on that topic because it's an important one and you'll hear us talk about it a lot. But talking of what we see and why DNA is important, let's just move on to talking about some of the patterns we see. This is our first podcast, so we're not going to go, or first session, right? So we're not going to go deep, deep, deep. So this is almost like rapid fire. Let's ask you, Sarah, a pattern when you're looking at DNA that you consistently see. And you can talk very briefly about the genes, but what is it you see when you're reading DNA often?
Yeah, primarily I work with chronic illness patients. I don't really
No,
care what the
we don't.
diagnosis is because it's just a manifestation of the
Mhm.
biochemistry. So, Amanda, you've done really, really well in coaching, all of your students to say, don't get distracted by a diagnosis, because it's there, but it's just
It
a
is.
presentation of symptoms. It's part of that assessment and evaluation. But what we need to do is look at genes forwards and backwards, right? But I also work with athletes. So as a lifelong athlete, and seeing my own DNA blueprint, the same day I thought, wow, I wish I had this for my sport. 20 years ago, playing Division I volleyball, this would have changed how I fueled, changed how I trained. How can we collaborate with sports medicine and
Mhm.
strength and conditioning coaches to also shift how we train because the injuries are
They're crazy.
crazy. They're crazy. We've got so much overuse, early specialization that's not helping athletes. They're no longer playing two and three sports like I did. They're focusing on one really, really early, and those overuse injuries are kind of just taking
Hmm.
over and ruining careers. So, what I see with my athletes most often is just whether or not they have the genes for oxidative stress. Oxidative stress is, an occupational hazard for athletes. And so, regardless of what I see in the genomics, we have to address and manage oxidative stress no matter what we're doing. But I do see that pretty often in clients and patients and athletes alike is oxidative stress and detoxification. So I love to look at things from the cellular level as much as possible because honestly, if we get out of our own way and we just focus on the cellular, we watch everything sort of trickle down and take care of itself. But so often, I think in other areas of medical practice, we're trying to play whack a mole with glucose and insulin and with cholesterol and, you know, peri and postmenopause symptoms. And instead of doing that, it's like, well, what's going on in the cell? Because that's controlling making energy in the form of ATP. Is there something disrupting that? And then Americans are chronically overworked and overstressed. And so stress is going to burn through your nutritional resources much, much faster. So we either have to calm down or we have to manage our stress way better than we do. So, and that the more oxygen we use, the more oxidative stress that we have. And when you're stressed or when you're, competing or training, you're going to use more oxygen. So that's just a byproduct of metabolism. And I see
And
that
she kind
pretty
of drilled
often.
through a lot of really intense biochemistry there.
You're
Like we
welcome.
think in patterns, like, okay, there's this cycle and this happened in the electron transfer chain, and this is what happened, and then that off gas is a bunch of free radicals, and we need to stabilize those. And we don't have enough nutrients, that doesn't work properly. So this is an example.
It's
Yeah,
really
it's
quite
very
simple,
simple.
Amanda.
Yeah, yeah. But no, you're absolutely right. And what Sarah's talking about is, oxidative stress is, when the body gets out of whack and is unable to stabilize these free radicals, which are a natural part of breathing, respiration, then you get into imbalance. And those molecules are extremely destructive. Name a system, name a tissue, name a cell, they're destructive. So the body has it has its innate intelligence and systems that are built in to manage that. But if you overwhelm them or you have variants in your genes, then that don't manage that as well, we can see that in your genetics, if you will, and we can bring in nutrients and lifestyle management, but we definitely can bring in nutrients. This is the field of nutrigenomics that actually will turn on and off these genes and yeah, we'll do something about that, right? How does that happen, right? We'll come back to oxidative stress. So, yeah, I mean, particularly athletes, like you said, it's I don't even know what the word is. Having had so many conversations with you about our athletes and pro sports, and every single pro athlete should have their genetics run because it will change your life, change how you feel, like you said, how you eat, how you rest, how you train. And you don't have to be a pro athlete. Every human, once you understand how you're built, it will change absolutely how you move, right? And how you structure training, exercise, etc. The one thing I see, then I'll talk about the gene pattern that I see, is particularly with midlife. So my patient population, I like Sarah, we both work with chronically ill individuals. My demographic is more midlife and beyond, but also working with parents and children, so adults and children with ADHD, so mental health, anxiety, depression, etc. And I've just lost my chain of thought where I was going to go. It was something with oxidative stress. No, I know what it was. It's the overtraining. So a lot of my ladies in midlife, when they go into menopause, they start hitting the gym so hard, lifting weights, and they're putting on weight. And I'm like, what is going on here? I said, the harder you work in the gym to, quote, lose weight, the more oxidative stress you're creating, more
Oxidative
inflammation,
stress.
and round and round we go. And I said, until we get your cells back online and you pull back, we can't address the weight, the metabolic pieces. So that's an overlap. I'll say real quick one of the patterns I see consistently because of my client population, and you will know this from my teaching, you see it yourself. We're looking at a pathway in the brain, so the dopamine, the risk reward pathway. And very often, if I see two genes that are running fast, we'll call them COMT. What's the other one, Sarah, that's downstream that I'm going to say?
Your
MAOA,
MAO,
bingo. When
MAOA,
those two are
MAOP. Yep.
turned on, when they run fast, and we can see this in genomics, it's like turning on a faucet and the water, without putting a stopper in the sink, and all the water runs down the drain. When I see this, which is often, I can almost say to the person, I don't almost say to the person, I say, let me ask you this. And they're like, what are you going to ask me, man? I said, how's your sleep? oh, how did you know? But how's your ability to focus, to stay on task? A lot of times with this combination of genes, you can stay on focus and you will absolutely burn out. So you can be hyper focused and then bam, what happened to me? Can't get off the couch in the afternoon, or like you lose all motivation and like, what happened to me? I said, it's just your genes running fast. We know how to fix that. We can slow those down with food. So I see that pattern so much. And you and I often see the reverse, right? If we're working with, mental health related issues, which is a whole nother topic. So that's the pattern I see. But we see a pattern so often around one particular nutrient, and we'll end on this one, Sarah. We got other things we want to talk about, but we're going to keep this as short and sweet as we can. So we'll talk about nutrient deficiencies in another podcast. So what is that one pathway or nutrient that you and I see almost, and not all the time, but the frequency is very high?
Yeah, I definitely see a higher need for choline, both for chronic illness clients as well as my athletes. And it's so tangible. It's such a tangible thing that you can give them nutritional recommendations for immediately. I think we've largely gotten away from eating like organ meats, and that has been to our detriment, liver in particular. But when we decided back in, what was
Maybe
it,
the
the
90s. It was
80s to
definitely the 90s.
cancel keto.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. We're February, heart health. So just talking about, well, what causes, heart attacks and high cholesterol and all of that. And we decided to demonize cholesterol in our diet, which I think is only 12% of our total food intake, converts to blood cholesterol levels. But we've taken out the egg yolk, and we've only had the white, and the choline is in some of the best concentrations in the egg yolk. So what genes are you looking at, Amanda, when you're
Yeah, and
looking
I
at
want to come
choline?
back and talk about the impact of choline on your athletes and connect that dot for us because it's really important. So choline, so we look at a number, and some of them are triggers for us to think clinically, but our kind of go-to is PEMT. And are we ready for this? Phosphatidylethanolamin methyltransferase. That's why we call it PEMT. But we look at MTHFD1. That's, some people think, oh, isn't that part of the methylation cycle? No, it's part of the folate metabolism cycle. So one sort of in our minds begets the other to say, hey, what's going on with choline sufficiency in somebody's diet? And then there's another one, choline dehydrogenase, that we're looking at. But what we're really talking about is when we see gene variants, it's triggering in us to ask questions about, do you have choline in your diet? And or what symptoms may somebody present with that say, even if I didn't have your genetics in front of me, what symptoms suggest, there may be some choline inefficiency or deficiency. So I'll talk about it for midlife, but why don't you go with choline and your athletes, and then we also want to end on food sources of choline or how we work around that. So talk about the athletic piece.
Yeah, so I created a program called the Genomic Edge, which is a self-led program for athletes and those who are interested in fitness, video modules, a workbook, and choline is something I talk about here. And educating the students who take my course or who speak to me about their DNA blueprints. We only identified choline as a necessary nutrient in 1998. So super, super new. I was in eighth grade at the time, just to put that in perspective. I'm born in the 80s, but it does help with muscle and performance recovery. So if you've got a lot of oxidative stress from your performance and your training, how quickly are you recovering to be able to continue to perform? And I work, with a lot of beach volleyball players who play 2 and 3 matches a day, sometimes 2, 3, and 4 days in a row. So they've got to essentially have little to no time to recover, to bounce back and play again. That's a recipe for injury, and poor recovery, just because you're using up all of your nutritional resources to play and play and play and play. So those of my athletes who do have higher choline needs, we're talking about like, hey, are you getting beets in the diet as well? We can utilize betaine in a similar way to help fuel, but even that's why like a beetroot powder
Hmm.
helps in sport. And so I love being able to talk to those who are in sports nutrition or athletes to go, hey, I know that we've got evidence to suggest that beets can help performance, but
Ah.
why is that? That's way more important to me because it increases, compliance and efficacy for those interventions. So yeah, like choline in that aspect in performance and recovery is pretty crucial, but we
And
don't talk
it's
about that one
acting
very
as a
much, do
methyl
we?
donor. Is that what it is there? So, and you need, so the biochemistry
Correct.
is the conversion of, it helps in the conversion of creatine to creatine phosphate, right? Is that right? As part of the electron transport chain, if I got that in the right. Okay.
Yes, and our methyl donor, if you're picturing your chemistry or organic chemistry again, it's that carbon with three hydrogens, and we're moving those methyl groups around in our chemical reactions. So we're just doing balancing a
We
chemical
are, and
equation is all we're
choline. So
doing.
we will, oh my gosh, I don't know how many times we'll talk about methylation. We'll do a 101 at some point in time because it's so important we understand it. But the body is brilliant. And so when we're reading DNA, we're looking for these signals that there can be some inefficiency in this very, very important cycle that connects. To me, it's the heartbeat of the body. It connects to so many different cycles. And so when we're seeing there's an inefficiency, the alarm bells go off and say, okay, let's look for food that if there's inefficiency in this cycle, we can create a kind of like a detour for the body and say, gosh, if we can't go this way around the traffic circle, we can cut across it. So choline and betaine and the foods that contain these nutrients are a bypass method. So beets, right? So choline, egg, liver, right? Organ meat would be your go-tos. I know if you're vegan or this is in your budget right now because the price of eggs or whatever, understanding what other foods the body can use that we can stack in there, like edamame or soybeans, quinoa, right, Swiss chard, I'm naming them beets. Sunflower
Sunflower
seeds are
seeds,
ways
yep.
we can stack your plate that we're just through DNA know we need to drive this kind of go the detour out. Your body needs the detour out. Okay, so that's athletes. So the way I'm looking at choline, because of my client population, very interesting. Those of you women going into midlife, but also men too. So perimenopause to menopause. A lot of times, my clients will experience brain fog. That's the classic, right? Brain fog. I can't connect the dots anymore, but I'm a smart individual. Well, what we see, what's interesting with PAMT is estrogen activates this gene. Well, what do you lose during midlife? So that PEMP gene can be working right, but if you don't have the ignition switch or you don't have, the fuel to activate that gene that will often come from estrogen, then you're not necessarily producing the phosphatidyl choline. What does that do? Phosphatidylcholine is integral to surrounding the nerves. Like it's part of the not only the myelin sheath, the protective coating of the neuron, but it also that choline molecule is part of acetylcholine. That's what helps fire information across the gap between your neurons. So if you're thinking you can't think straight, what I've tried to describe is like, yeah, if you have an inefficiency or a deficiency, you don't have the information to think straight. So yeah, bypassing a lot of biochemistry, but it is fuel for how you think. So we can see that.
Yeah, and for your ADHD
Yeah.
kids
Oh,
too, which I have in my life as well.
critical. Yeah, that's a great point. With yeah, they sometimes they can be firing on all cylinders, right? But we're missing the conversation, right? They brilliant.
We're passing right by and going around
Yeah,
the
yeah,
block
yeah.
is
And they
what's
talk a mile
happening.
a minute. It's like, wait, didn't you just say that? Like, oh, this child's brilliant, but let's kind of redirect, the conversation. So you're right. That helps fire information across the right gap. So, yeah. Well,
Yeah. It also helps keep cholesterol in solution. So if we're lacking in choline and we've got gallstones and we're losing the ability for our bile to function at its best, which I think is part of what happened to me as well in my postpartum, where I gained 50 pounds with my first, 60 pounds with my second. I have a 6 foot frame, so lost that weight really quickly, but at some point, I think all the breastfeeding, the postpartum needs, nutritionally, and you're trying to flush all of that adipose tissue through the liver, we need a little more choline support, I think. And I
Yeah,
don't
it's
have any research to
interesting.
suggest that yet, but it's just from my own experience where I'm like, methylation is really taking a hit postpartum. And we could consider, supplementing a little bit better, but I know for a fact that choline is not
That is so
required to be in
interesting
a
when you
prenatal
think it's
vitamin.
integral to every single membrane in the body. We'll have to have Alabama on chit-chatting with us, right, about that. That would be super interesting. But two, just sort of finish up here because you're talking about bile, such an incredible molecule that we often just say, oh, it's there to help metabolize lipids, right? But it is so integral. There's one testing company that actually tests a gene that helps us understand whether there's some inefficiency in actually producing bile from cholesterol. So can you imagine back in the 90s or 80s, 90s, where not only like were we demonizing eggs, so not only you don't have choline, so you're not eating nature's little pearl, but then you have an inefficiency in the gene that's trying to use the substrate cholesterol to produce bile, and bile's more than just cholesterol. But can you imagine how inefficient that process was? And how many people may have had their gallbladder removed? Then that's not even funny. I was one of them. It's like, wow, yeah. Oh, you
Same.
too. Yeah. It
Me
became
too.
like the
Yep.
surgery, right?
Yeah.
Postpartum. Yeah.
Postpartum.
Oh, my goodness. Sarah, we've spent 40 minutes, talking about this amazing field of DNA and some of the patterns we see. Um, so we hope you've enjoyed this. Listen in, subscribe to Beyond the Sequence. And both of us hope you, like I said, hope you enjoyed it. And we will see you again in the next one.
Yeah, definitely give it a follow, share it, and give us some ratings too. I hear that it helps the algorithm if you give us some support in the ratings. So hopefully, we'll have some more new topics for
Yeah,
you
and you know what?
coming
On that
up.
note, now we gotta go, right? We're keeping our listeners like listening in. Like, are they done yet? They done yet? We have a whole lot of topics we'd like to talk about, but if you got something that you're interested in, you want to hear about, let us know. Send us a note. What we can't do is interpret your DNA. We because that is such a one-on-one experience. So questions like I've got this and I've got that, or how we can talk about that at some point in time, Sarah. I've got this gene, I've got that gene. Everything we look at is contextual, so we would always look at your entire DNA blueprint. But we can definitely talk about
Hmm.
frequency of genes we see. But we can't solve your DNA on air, but we can definitely address topics if you're interested. So, on that note, Sarah.
Where do you, yeah, where do you want people to follow you? How can
Well,
people
I'm
find
the
you?
Genomic Kitchen, so you can follow me on the Genomic Kitchen on all platforms, right? Instagram,
Instagram, yep,
Facebook,
Instagram,
and my
Facebook, and
website,
your
and then I'm
website,
Amanda
Genomic Kitchen.
Archibald on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and Sarah Amidon, like Amazon, Amidon, and I'm rootandfruitnutrition.com. And then you can follow me on Instagram and on Facebook as well and LinkedIn. So check us out. We will see you next time.